Good afternoon, folks. We are live and up and running once again. Let me get everything switched over to the right layout, and we'll do a bit of sound check, make sure everything's set up properly. And we will get started with today's Beatbox Jam stream. All right, we have audio and video. And make sure my sound sources are set up properly. We don't want to have the RC505 unmuted when I'm doing the first part of the stream. But I think we have everything set up properly. I'm checking the audio readouts, make sure that the sounds themselves aren't redlining the mic. But let me put on a quick loop that I did in the background, and I'll explain what's on the docket for today's jam stream. Okay, that should be good. Hopefully I'm not competing too much with the background loop. And so it's been a bit of time since we last did one of these. It seemed to be averaging one every few weeks, just due to timing. We were supposed to do one of these jam streams last week, but the schedule had to get updated at the last minute. So we are here today. And so we'll start with the usual warm-up. Just running through some drills and some practice to get the blood flowing, get everything warmed up. And then from there, we will move to technique and sound theory for today's stream. And I put it in the stream title. I was thinking about it throughout the week about stuff I wanted to talk about. And it's been a hot minute, so I figured we would return to our ongoing discussion on the concept of technicality in beatboxing. Spend some time talking about that, go through some drills and some ideas that I've come up with for some of the patterns we've been working on, and one that we introduced in the last jam stream. And we'll do that for a bit, maybe get into some of the drills for what I've been doing to sort of practice the concepts behind the patterns. Do that for a bit, and then the remainder of the stream, as usual, will be devoted to BGM brainstorming ideas. I've got the usual synthesizer stuff all hooked up and ready to go. It's just off at the moment, so you can't hear it. And then we'll see if we can come up with some ideas for future BGM track releases, which I do need to spend some more time working on and recording. Since the last jam stream, I did do a recording dump and grabbed a bunch of finished tracks from my loop station, got them onto the computer and edited, but there's still more. I think there's probably at least a dozen more that we've done across the last several streams that need to be recorded and captured so I can figure out where I'm going to put them. But that should give us enough to do today and enough things to talk about. So with that, I will go ahead and clear off the sample loop. We'll make sure the file is blank so we can use it later. And we will work on some warm-up drills and some freestyle practice and get started. As usual, I will keep an eye on the sound readout here on OBS and make sure the actual sounds themselves aren't hitting too hard on the mic. And we'll go ahead and get started. All right. It is warm today, and I'm going to go through a lot of water by the time we're done. But I think that should do it for warm up. So I'm going to switch the caption over to technique and sound theory, and we will go through some talking points that I was thinking about today before the stream and talk about technicality, one of my favorite topics to sort of discuss and explain when it comes to beatbox technique. So let me change that real quick. There we go. I think based on sound check, everything is good. So I'll leave it there, and people can let me know if I need to tweak anything with the sound to make sure everything is coming through properly. All right. So like we said at the top of the stream, based on the title and what I was planning on talking about today, we are going to return to the ongoing discussion of technicality and combo chains in beatboxing, which I think it's been a few streams since we've talked about it. So just to kind of check in on what we've been discussing and talk about one of the newer patterns that I have been practicing and drilling over the last, I'd say, couple months now. It'd be a good chance to see what I've kind of come up with and what I've learned as I've been practicing. So again, going way back to the earlier streams, I'll kind of point there towards the earlier ones we did where I just defined technicality. And unless people come through and need me to kind of explain the basic concept of what those sound sets and combo sets mean in terms of beatboxing, I'm not going to spend a ton of time just defining it. And I think I've kind of give that disclaimer every time we talk about it. But of the main sound sets that we've been talking about here on stream, we talk about sort of the main two that I like to use in a lot of my beatbox patterns when it comes to freestyling or putting together kind of a more cohesive song. The TKP, which I did a pretty decent amount of times in the just warm up and freestyle practice. There's the TKK, which has been one of my ongoing things that I've been practicing. I haven't been doing it a ton lately, and I feel like I'm starting to get a little bit rusty with it, so I'm going to have to work on more dedicated, just practice time drilling the TKK. But that's the... And then what I consider the sort of secondary series of patterns are the newer ones that we've been talking about here on stream, and I haven't had as much time in total to practice since I've been doing this. And the first one of those is the POTO, which is one of my favorites. And that's the... And that one, I think, is still a work in progress. Not necessarily because of the accuracy and speed. I could always improve that when it comes to how cleanly I can do the... and how it hits. But what I would like to develop more with that one is just its volume. I would like it to be louder. And that's just practice over time when it comes to mouth strength from both the lips and the tongue, since those are the only two muscles or part of the anatomy that are doing them. It's just a general pop sound plus a tongue tip click, which I think I've sort of settled on as the way I'm distinguishing that one from the other types of clicks you do with your tongue. And that's just the... And by changing the position of the mouth and lips, you can change how it sort of resonates a bit. But I'd like it to be louder so that it's not quite as faint compared to the regular kind of middle or back of the tongue click that most people know how to just do by default. The... That one is much louder just by default because it's a stronger sound than the. So that tells me I need to probably just drill the basic positioning for that type of tongue click. Because there's no real variation where it's done. It's done right kind of on the palate with the tip of the tongue instead of the back, which is why it sounds more kind of lighter. And if you give it some room to echo, that's how you're getting them. Versus like not as sharp as the regular tongue click. Another thing that I'd like to work into more patterns and things so it's in my brain as something to slot in whenever I get a freestyle redeem or I am on the spot to create something is the regular. It's like a combination of the clop and the tongue click. I don't know if it has an official name since it's been something that's existed for a while. That sounds like, and that one has, it's a combination of like a K snare plus the tongue click. A regular clop just sounds like, and my clops and hollow clops could definitely be louder too. I haven't been drilling that quite as much lately, but by using a bit of force and suction and like a K type noise when doing the click, you kind of combine them together with the clop, and that's how you get that. And making it hollow gives it a bit more of an echo to it. And so using that kind of hollow clicker or like hollow clop combination and putting it into a beat, you'd have something like. And it functions very well as a snare. And that's usually how I see people using it. And I always forget that it's there because it requires a bit more effort and a bit more combination of muscles to do as opposed to some of the other lip-based snare sounds, which are much kind of more simple. But that's another example of something to kind of work into the arsenal out of habit so that it's there. And then going back to technicality, so we talked about the POTO. And the most recent one, which is actually one of the most elementary patterns, it's just not one I focused on when I was learning, is just the TK. The TKK is a triplet. It's a 3-sound combo. But just the TK itself, T-hat sound, and just a K sound, which is like the letter K without the A, without the vocalization, and it just becomes a. And the TK sound, again, usually when people are learning, probably from teachers who are experienced out in like the pro scene for beatboxing, I think they recommend that people learn that early on because it's very easy to practice. And learning the TK allows you to transition into the triplet set like the TKK or something like a TKP easier because then you have mastery over just those two sounds that you can do them fast. I didn't do that. I skipped straight to triplet patterns and didn't really spend a ton of time focusing on just the two. But by practicing the tick, tick, and then doing them back to back as a 1-2 chain, you can actually do some interesting stuff with it when you get familiar and fast with doing those two sounds really quickly. And so that's what I've been kind of practicing because it leads into the TKT. I think that's what I was calling it. But we'll get there in a sec. So the TK just by itself. That's about as fast as I could just do it right now without kind of practicing it for a bit. But folks who've been drilling just those two sounds forever can make it sound just like a machine gun, a rapid fire, really light, fast sound. Almost sounds like kind of like a hi-hat run in a way, different from something like a. Instead, it sounds kind of more like a different hits on a closed hat. And just using that as a two-piece filler in regular beats can actually sound pretty interesting too, even though it sounds so simple. You might be able to do something like, and then use it kind of just like a complex hat rhythm instead of a filler technicality pattern, because it's something that repeats that much. It's not really a filler, it's part of the core rhythm. But what we were talking about before was taking that TK and then just changing the pattern slightly to make it a triplet and making it a TKT. And then I think, let's see, we made it, what I talked about a couple streams ago when I was kind of introducing this one as something new that I was working on. It became a 4 pattern. No, it's still a triplet. It becomes a 4 when you add a kick to the front. I had to think a little bit about that. So using that in place of something like a triplet pattern just means it's a different sort of sound. It sounds, again, like you're going nuts on a hi-hat in a drum kit. So taking the TKT, you're basically saying ticket without any of the vocalization. And if you do something like slot that in on a beat and then maybe add a kick to the front, you get something like, and it's very simple in design, but it's just not something that I've ever really practiced over the years I've been doing this. So when I started thinking about it one day, I said, I'm going to introduce that to the practice list of technicality chains to be able to add in somewhere. So if we think about that from just like our sample from before, like a hip hop-ish type beat, you might get something like, and then do interesting things like combine the TKP or even the TKK, which I really don't use enough in beats just because I don't feel comfortable doing it super fast and fast chains. But doing something like stitching the TKP to the TKT, that would be, or even flipping it around, doing the TKT first. Oh, okay, it's kind of more like you're doubling up on the hats. A little bit tricky because you're doing 2 different sets that sound very similar and just have one slight difference in the sound. So it'd be T. I haven't really practiced it that way, but kind of alternating between those 2 in a beat could change up the way it hits to the listener's ear. And again, it adds more variety and a bit more flavor to what you're doing, which is why we talk about the concept of technicality to begin with. It's a way to add variation and things to patterns in the construction, so when you flesh that out to the actual routine, you have more that you can work with, and it's not just repeating the same kind of monotonous beat over and over again. You have the ability to kind of improvise and change up the way it sounds, and it's a lot more interesting, gives more creative kind of leeway to experiment around with how you want the actual sounds to fit together, and you could fit them together in a bunch of different ways. So as far as the latest with the technicality, again, the TK and TKT have been what I've been kind of focusing on lately. So I wanted to talk a bit about how I've been trying to structure the drills, which is something that I think we talked about in the previous stream as well, when I was introducing that pattern. And so for the TKT, you could do it on the triplets as sort of a triplet cycle, and there's nothing wrong with that, just like I've done for the TKP. I can obviously do that one much faster because I've been practicing it for longer. But I think what I was talking about before when I introduced the TKT as a new pattern, quote unquote new, to be practicing, I was talking about how adding the kick to make it a 4, but giving it a little bit of a break makes it a bit easier to practice than just doing it as a back-to-back cycle. So that's where the technically the kick is at the end, or if you're starting, same thing. It's just wherever it starts. But having that kick on essentially the 4 or the 1, if you listen to it long enough, it just kind of blends together and becomes either the 4 or the 1. But if we construct it logically, TKTB would be the pattern. And as simple as it sounds, just doing that over and over again to make sure it stays on time and it stays consistent, you're essentially kind of forcing yourself to mentally keep time using what I think is the kick is the easiest place to anchor it. So whether you're starting with the kick or it's ending the pattern on the 4, it's still a 4/4 rhythm, and it's good practice to just have something steady like that you can train your brain to keep on a consistent time. Because when you're first learning beatboxing, I think for someone who doesn't have a musical background like me, learning how to essentially create the drum machine in your brain that's going to be able to keep tempo, and I wouldn't say I'm a super expert at it, but compared to when I first started, being able to just maintain consistent rhythm is something that I think a lot of people just develop over time. Well, you could start in your practicing, like we've talked about before, with really complex rhythms or speed patterns or something and try and learn at the very beginning. But I think per what a lot of pro beatboxers say when they do their tutorials, starting with complexity instead of starting with basics is probably not going to be as conducive to learning. Sure, you can learn all your instruments for what kind of snares, kicks, hats, and whatnot you want to put together. But if your pattern that you're practicing and drilling is not something that you can just start slow and build up to, and you're kind of running before you can walk, I think that's difficult. And I was sort of in the middle. I didn't start with complexity and I didn't start with basics. I was sort of in the middle. So the example would be, if let's say you spent the time to learn how to just do kicks consistently and hats and PF snare, one of the really common beginner ones people learn. And so once you learn all of those and you do those sounds on their own, you start thinking about how to put them together into a beat in order to create an initial pattern for establishing a rhythm. And then from there, you start building out, right? If you don't give yourself something simple to start with, like just a real simple kind of rock 4/4 type beat, something like, which is kind of just the Billie Jean beat when you think about it, and instead go for something that's going to be a bit more complex while you're just still trying to learn basic mastery of the sounds. Like maybe it's a complicated dubstep-ish type of beat, something like just a real simple contrast example. When you're first learning, it's going to be difficult to establish consistency in rhythm unless you're a rhythm trained person, like a drummer. Someone who has that background probably can start a little more advanced than someone who's never been musically trained at all. And so just like for regular beats, the reason why I bring this example up is it comes into play with technicality too. So when you're first trying to learn how to do the sound chains and the combos of sounds that are going to fit together to become whatever you're going to use in technicality, whether it's TKP like I did, or you start with TKK, which is very common, you want to give yourself something simple that you can practice, even though it's monotonous and can seem kind of tedious at times. I think most people find that when they start simple and then work their way up to the complexity stuff, you see more progress than if you try and start complex first and try and piece together a lot of the basics. I think you can still learn that way. I just don't think it's going to be as easy. So if we think for the TKT, the newest example, when I was first coming up with ways to practice that sound, because again, the sound set itself is very, very basic. think it might be one of the first examples of technicality in modern beatboxing that anyone's ever done, and people have probably been doing it since the very start. But taking that pattern, I think you could put it into a sample beat or just practice doing it in a triplet, but slow. So if you're doing something like that's, I believe, a 4 count. Or you add the kick in on the front or the end. Huh, that changes the rhythm a bit. I think it's because it's going slow changes what that time signature is. I'm not an expert on time signatures, but if you're doing it fast, that's where it stays on 4/4. But if you're going, is that 3/4? Might be 3/4 when you do it that slow, but that's still fine because again, you want to have the sounds be comfortable and consistent and clean before they're fast. So doing that till it's consistent and you feel like you could do it, then you start ramping up the speed and maybe start going, and then you slot in the kick wherever you feel comfortable, as long as you can just maintain the set rhythm. And if you were to do it 50 times without taking a break, you aren't having the rhythm break down and it's not getting kind of muddy, or you're going off time. There's no key, there's no pitch you're trying to hit. Instead, it's all rhythm and trying to keep consistent. And like a lot of times when you're doing practicing and looking at establishing that consistency, it's really old advice at this point, I know, but using a metronome and something that can tap out your time counts and give you a place to snap to mentally when it comes to structuring the beats, I think is still very important. I haven't been doing a ton of metronome training recently, but I have used that in order to give myself something that's going to anchor how I'm doing something and how I'm practicing it, so that the sound and rhythm is consistent. And I think just spending time doing that over the course of a few weeks when you're first learning the sounds will result in pretty good progress. For something like a TK combo, I think people are most likely going to see it get better relatively quick because it's simple. But for something like the POTO, because it's a little bit more complicated, I just know from my personal experience, not doing it for a super long time, it took a bit longer for that one to gain competency. And because I've been ignoring it a little, I think I've gotten a little rusty with the sound and the volume. So that's why I want to push to sharpen that one up, make it a little bit louder and cleaner so that I can use it more often. And that one, I find the easiest drill would just be to do it back to back because it's 4 sounds. And I think because that one uses a bit more tongue muscle in general, you could just practice the individual sounds too and just do them drilling nonstop over and over again to get better. The pop, that one's interesting because of the way it uses the kind of rolling motion of the lips. I do think it's possible to get that very loud and very sharp because I've seen a bunch of pro beatboxers. I think Bob Ellie is one I could think of that has really, really pronounced pops and clicks. And so people who have that level of proficiency and can do those sounds really effectively have just been doing them forever and been practicing them. And I think we talked before when I first introduced the POTO, something I was practicing. The is not a sound that's unique to beatboxing. I've known how to do that since forever. It's just a sound you make when something pops open like a tennis ball can. And I think anyone who knows how to do it, if you want to factor that into a beatboxing sound. You just practice doing it over and over again until it gets stronger, and you have the ability to put it into something like a rhythm. You could do other things with the pop, like hollowing the throat out to get like a hollow pop, like a instead of a. And so I don't really do that with the POTO because it takes a little bit more effort, and I try to do those patterns quickly. But if you're doing something like now the position is tough. I don't know if it's really that efficient to try and do POTO with a hollow pop, but just taking them, which thinking about it in recent memory and media, I think the NPCs with the sounds they would do, I think I used to see that one a lot, but you can purpose that into a useful beatboxing sound and technicality. And that's just practicing it over and over again. Thinking about maybe more advanced patterns you could do with something like the POTO, you might be able to do something like that's using just clicks, but that's a little bit tougher because I usually use it as a filler in between. So a better example of how I use the PO2 would be and it's showing up as kind of like a fill or a transitional phrase in between the main rhythm, which is how a lot of technicality is used in a lot of cases. Not all, but a lot. So yeah, I think my homework for drilling between now and the next time we talk about technicality will be focusing on the TK and the TK chains, and then the PO-TO chains, and working on getting those better, and then really all of them. I need to kind of force myself and train myself to practice all of the technicality patterns, because even the TKK, which I tend to ignore in a lot of my just freestyle stuff because it's not something that pops into my mind immediately, I feel like it could be better, even though I've gotten to a decently consistent speed with the TKK. We were talking about earlier when I was kind of overviewing the concept of technicality, and I did the TKK sample. I like adding kicks to the front of it because it makes it easier to sort of loop a fast chain with those three sounds. So that's how you're getting the but it could be cleaner. And there's some interesting potential to potentially chain that into some of the other patterns as well, which is going to be sort of something else I focus on in the future, how to stitch the different sounds together to create newer ones and more advanced chains. Instead of just 6, it might, or 3, it might be 6 or 9, and using 3 different triplet sets put together to make the 9 would be something interesting. Something like a TKP, TKK, TKT, which would be, but it's 9 total individual things, and how to structure that into a beat would probably depend on what the tempo or time signature is of the beat itself. That would be tough, but it would make for some really complex, difficult patterns. That's sort of like the high level of applying a lot of this stuff. And I think it'd be good to push towards that from the kind of competency level and just see how advanced and how much different things I can do with it. So that's kind of become my mid to longer term goal, because I'm not really a technicality focused beatboxer. I think I do a little bit of everything from the freestyle and warm up stuff. I think I tend to do focus on a lot of bass, and I have been trying to force myself to practice more inward bass so I can get better at that, so we can talk about it here on these jam streams, and I can use inward bass in beats as a functional way to get low end sound. So there's a lot to work on. Beatboxing is an ongoing sort of grind of trying to learn new sounds and master the ones you know, and think about ways you can put them together and utilize the tool set. And that's part of why I find it so fascinating, because the skill ceiling is extremely high. I don't think there really is one. Some of the pros out in the scene that I follow that compete, that win the big international championships and all that, I'm sure those folks would be the first to tell you that they can't stop improving. Nobody can stop improving. Once you get to the point where your mastery level is extremely high, like the pros, I imagine it comes down to coming up with new and innovative ways to either use their tools or develop new ones to come up with something that no one's heard or done before. And that's pretty neat to see, because there's some insane stuff at the high level. I personally consider myself an intermediate level beatboxer. I've been doing it for about 6 years now. Started in 2019. Started talking about it when I became a VTuber and started streaming here. But that's kind of a drop in the bucket. You look at someone who's been doing it for 20 years and what someone who's been doing it for 20 years is capable of, or even 10 years. And it's leagues above in complexity than anything I can do. So that's kind of the goal. Keep working at it, keep improving, and not get stuck in a rut. And then taking the opportunity to talk about it with the community and folks that hang around on jam streams like this. So whether people are catching it live or they're watching me talk in the archives, hopefully the ongoing discussion about what I'm learning and things that I find and bring to the discussion is interesting, because I like talking about it. But let's see. I think that's it for what I wanted to cover on technique and sound theory for technicality. It's something we usually touch on every few streams and return to, since, like everything else, it's an ongoing evolution and something I like talking about. So what we can do is switch over to the setup for BGM brainstorming, and I would like to try and spend some time coming up with ideas, just because I haven't had really any time recently off stream to sit down and noodle around with my synth and the loop to come up with some more BGM ideas. And this year in general, now just looking at the calendar and how close we are to the end of the year, this year is probably going to be the lightest in terms of BGM releases of any year. And that's okay, because I'm been spending some time working on some other music related things that aren't just BGM tracks that are part of the releases. And I didn't want to get into sort of the pattern of releasing a set amount of things per year just because I felt like I needed to. And so this year, I think we're probably only going to have maybe two major releases for the BGM stuff. I'm thinking about the 329 EP, which is earlier in the year. There is going to be something for Halloween. I'm working on a project now that will probably be done by early October if I finish editing everything. It's going to be a bit more involved than previous projects, but I might be able to squeeze in a BGM collection of things that we've made on stream here, because it's been a while since I've done one. That would be the fourth BGM collection. Let me look at my song archive. I think the last one might have been almost 2 years ago now, because I have the tracks. They're the ones that people help me create and name on stream. I have them all. Some of them are still on the loop. A lot of them have been ported over and recorded and edited on my computer, but they haven't been put into a collection. Yeah, it's going to be 4.0. 3.0 was, I wonder if this will tell me when this came out. Yeah, I want to say it was a 2023. So there's definitely enough tracks that the community has brainstormed and helped me name that can fill out another release. So my guess is if I did 2 more full releases this year, one's going to be Halloween, and then the other might be that. And then looking towards next year, there's some other stuff I want to do as far as dedicated chill and electronic releases too. But I've been spending a bit more focus on editing things and recording things that are not BGM. And so my goal is to release at least a couple standalone songs that are similar to what we did for the Mischief for Bits, where it is a more fleshed out song that has vocals, and they'll be hip hop type ones with me attempting to rap over them. The larger vocal project is still underway. I just haven't quite figured out how I want to put it together since some things have changed. But that's something else that I considered trying to do this year, but I think in the interest of quality, it's probably going to be further out once I can come up with some solutions for figuring out how to record and mix non-rap vocals. And I might reach out to some of my peers in the space to see who they work with and maybe get some professionals on board that can help us create a better product than me just figuring it out myself. So we'll see how all that goes, but still a lot I want to do. Not enough time to do it. All right. So I'm going to switch my mic inputs so that I can be back on my Scarlett, and then we will get the synth loaded and turned on, and I'll change my caption too before. We'll spend the rest of our time on stream here coming up with ideas for BGM tracks. So let me switch the audio over and then we'll jump in. All right. So now I should be audible again on mic, but because, again, we're going through my Scarlett instead of the loop station that has a different audio mixing set of settings, I'm going to sound a bit different, but should still be audible. And now let me turn on the synth. Okay, think audio input's coming in through the synth, okay? So now we can think about some ideas for BGM tracks. And I was thinking initially maybe we can circle back to kind of the more chill side of things. I can't remember what we did last stream because it's been a while, but I would like to spend some time brainstorming ideas for kind of mellow and chill tracks because there will be another chill type release in the near future. I just don't know when. But let me see if we can establish like a real simple and smooth kind of rhythm and build the idea around that. And we'll start with maybe kind of a jazz drum kit to kick things off. And I'm also just testing how the input's registering so that we're not peaking on the mic for the inputs coming in through the synth. Okay, now it's a matter of coming up with some rhythms and patterns that aren't just mimicking and duplicating what we've done before, since there's been two official chill releases so far. Neon Night Lounge and then Shaken, Stirred, and Chilled. So doing something a bit more, I was thinking trip hop or ambient kind of sounding, since a lot of the more, I guess, hip hop adjacent type rhythms, something like. We've done that a lot, so we don't want to just kind of default to that similar type of rhythm. So let me come up with something, get it captured, and then kind of build from there. Yeah, let's use that as kind of a skeleton. We'll do one repeat of that. Let me see if I can get the first note or first part of the kick to not be muffled. And I think it's because I'm hitting the loop capture and the first input not at the same time. So I gotta get a little bit of the rust off. Okay, we can't pause too much at the beginning. It's just got to be timed properly. I wonder if the tail's cutting off too soon. There we go. Now I can think about some other instruments to layer in. Open hat, maybe alternate a little bit. Okay, that's got potential. I still think the first part of the beat is muffled slightly. I want to redo that. Yeah, a little bit tricky because there we go. Of course, the one time I get it to accurately start and loop without cutting the sound off, the last rim shot was off by a slight amount. So clearly I need to practice a bit more because I don't normally have to take this many passes just to record a simple part of a rhythm. Maybe we make that a little louder. There you go. Now can I have the other hat? And that's the wrong hat. Okay. That'll work. Now I want to go for bass. We could try to do some low piano chords to kind of establish where the notes are for the bass. I don't think I've done that in a while. Problem is, because guitar to bass is what I usually use to boost the low end, give it kind of more oomph to it when we're establishing the bass instruments. I don't think I can do chords because it's going to apply that to each note and then it's going to clash. So like just two notes, like a 1 and 2. It sounds like there's 4 notes being played and they clash pretty violently. But if we do just one note, then it's just one note with the bass kind of harmony underneath it. And I think I like the first variation better. Let's get it captured. Rhythm's off. There we go. So now we can use that pattern and then add in an actual bass that follows the same note pattern. I think we need to back off guitar to bass a bit so it's not rattling quite so much. Thinking about adding kind of a harmonizing melody underneath, but know, just going one step down definitely clashes. We could leave it that way, and then maybe add like a really light or lower volume string set of melodies underneath. Okay, let's try it with the strings. I think I want it to be even lower in the background. Moving on to the higher melodies. This is just a single sustained note, same note as the bass line. Oh, I should have taken the guitar to bass off. Yeah, let me do that. It's going to cause a little bit of distortion I don't really want on that higher note. Oh wow, it started way lower than I thought it was gonna start. There, that should do it, and I can always drop it down. Experimenting with chords. Oh, maybe go one lower. Okay, I think that might work for like a sustained 2-note chord that just kind of goes throughout. All right, let's go ahead and save that and see if we can swap anything out. Before we do, I need to go run to the little Raku's room real quick. So normally I just let everything pause, but so we don't have dead silence and my model staring awkwardly at the camera. I'm actually going to go to the loading screen for a minute, and then we will resume rather than just have dead air. So let me do that, and then we'll be back in 1 sec. All right, sorry about the wait, folks. We are back. All right, well, let's resume where we left off. So far, we've got 3 tracks: rhythm, bass line, and the start of the melody. High synth, 2 chords with strings. I think as far as the mixing goes, I want the long, persistent 2 chords to be lower than the bass. But now let's think of something else we can pair that's going to be like maybe a higher melody or something that we can add alongside everything else. And maybe we can add some sliced, filtered instruments. So this is 329, synth 329. And it has a simple, which one is this? Low pass filter over it. So we could take this and then add a rhythm to it by slicing it. Be kind of a long melody, but we can see how that plays with everything else. And get that looped. I think that step down is slightly off. But the step up, that one's fine. I wonder if I should just do the whole thing again. Yeah, let's do it again. It's a long pattern, but I'd rather it be clean. There we go. Thinking about something to add in on the 5th track. Whoops. I did not hit the loop cutoff. I want it to end. There we go. Okay, I think that'll actually fit together okay. We could do something with this pattern where the piano part and the repeating high synth alternate, so not playing at the same time. This is also a low-pass filter being applied over the whole track. All right, let's save that. We have all 5 tracks captured. So we can think about how this one would be structured when it was actually performed or recorded. If we start with the bass line. Ooh, what if we started with the piano? Then we fade in the bass line. Then we use the slight lead in from the piano to fade in the rhythm and the drums. Then we let that run for a cycle. Then we fade in the strings. We don't want that to be too loud, so we keep it kind of low and in the background. We fade in the final instrument, the high synth. I think we could have them playing at the same time. I was curious if they would clash too much to have them playing at the same time, but I don't think they do, because they use a similar note progression, so it's not completely dissonant. Maybe drop the beat out. And we re-isolate everything, take the high instruments out, and let everything kind of play for a bit. And then maybe towards the outro, we fade out everything to just the beat. And that's the song. Okay, I think that's got potential. Took a little bit to sort of play around with the different sections and put it together. Sometimes these tracks come together really quickly, and other times it takes me like 40 minutes just to come up with a series of ideas that I like. Okay. You could also look at a section where we drop out the bass line and the strings to make it focus a bit more on the synths. And a lot of options. I'll have to think about that when I eventually go to record this one. Okay, we'll do a final save. And what we'll do is we will move on. Let's do another one. Let's see if we have time to do one more track for today's session. It's going to be a little bit less than normal, but that's okay. There's not a specific quota for how many of these I'm trying to get done, but usually if I get a lot of ideas, we can get three tracks, and if things go really well, maybe 4, but 2 is still all right. I think I want to spend some more time working on the loop. It's been busy lately. But let's see. Let me go back to our rhythm section. Let's go for something a bit more higher energy, but maybe something we can make kind of a darker song that would double as something we could use for like a Halloween release. Might do, this is the electronic drum kit. We might do an establishing kick line and then go to some of the other kits for different snares. Yeah, solid eighth note kicks would be fun. Ooh, we could do drum and bass. I have to redo the kick line, but yeah, we haven't done a drum and bass one in a while. Okay. That might be a little loud. Yeah, this is definitely going to be faster than the last one. Now for bass. Good layer of clap underneath that kind of sharp snare. Okay, very faint. You almost can't tell it's there. Now for the bass line, we could try and maybe distort some guitar. Ooh, that's pretty menacing. adding an actual string bass underneath it. Let me make that a little lower. Okay, it's not a bad foundation for a drum and bass song. Definitely sounds kind of evil. We could do something like add a choir synth, which we've done for a lot of the more spooky-ish sounding tunes. That's not bad. Started on beat though. And we're gonna octave it. Oh, I think yeah, that's not what I wanted. I did them kind of in sequence. I think one repeat. Make it a little bit louder too so it picks up. Now we want to layer it in each octave underneath for the same duration. Okay, that's an interesting pairing of sounds. Now it sounds even more ominous. Okay, let's save that. It's kind of a fun beat. Now what I was thinking is we could take some of the slicing effects and maybe work on a different pattern, but we add in like another high synth that can be going along with the choir. And this one has this is 330. One right after 329 that I don't use a ton. This has kind of more of like a ghostly synthesizer noise feel to it. So we could take this and slice it and maybe add some panning delay. Do some interesting stuff with this to give it kind of more of, again, like a haunting sound. Could go slicer. Let's go pattern 5. So it's not just on the ones. Now it's got a bit of a stagger to it. And if we make it kind of jump around and echo with panning delays. Okay. That's a possibility. Mix balancing is going to be interesting on this one. I think I want the bass higher than the chorus. Still haven't quite figured out how to effectively use the vinyl flick track level effect. It can kind of record scratch or cut, but that's not really how the effect is used. And there's no real ways to adjust the settings on this one. It just kind of does what it does. But you can use it to kind of flip the way the entire playing track sounds. Like this is kind of reversing it. Yeah, it's playing it backwards essentially. But the rhythm isn't exact, so it's not like it plays symmetrically forwards and backwards. This is beat scatter, which is taking a preset pattern and sort of rejumbling up the whatever its effect is being, whichever track is subject to that effect rather. And this is what it sounds like with it just applying to the beat. But I think it doesn't really create something that matches up with everything else that's not being jumbled. And that's what happens if we apply it to everything, which I think makes it sound a bit more natural. And this is with it applying to the rhythm, the bass, and the choir, but not the high running synth. That's interesting. I don't know if I've done something quite like that in the song before. And that makes it a polka rhythm. It's essentially halftime, I think. Yeah, it's kind of half-timing the whole thing. If you turn it up to its max, then yeah, it becomes polka. Interesting. I think this one does have potential, and it's only 4 tracks. There's a fifth. The fifth one is empty for the moment. But for kind of a simple combination, which is kind of describes drum and bass in general for a lot of things. Thinking about if we had kind of an alternate rhythm switch up with the scatter, and then we turn it off to bring in the final synth. Could do that. It might seem like the song's too awkwardly sort of stitched together, though. Having the bass line and then the choir synths be the last thing on there and then fade out to the high running synth. That could be an interesting way to outro the track. And I can't think of anything off the top of my head I want to put in the 5th slot, but we can leave it open. That way, in case I think of something, I can always add it later. But yeah, this one was a lot easier to map out than the last one. This is with it reversed. It's very similar. It's just the rhythm is different because it's playing it backwards. Same with the synth if it's backwards. It does match up because both of them are similar rhythms when played forwards. But nah, I think we'll leave it straightforward instead. Okay. That's definitely one we can use. All right. Well, looking at the time, I don't have enough time to work on another one. Actually, I have to run out the door shortly here. So what we'll do is let's get ready to wrap up for the session today. Let me see who's online that we can raid. I wonder if there's any other VTubers that are actively working on music. Let me take a look. I'm streaming a bit earlier than I normally would on the weekends, so there's not a ton of people online. It doesn't look like there's a ton of VTubers that are working on music. I see a lot of channels that are just straight up streaming royalty-free music, which I didn't even know you could do for content. But I guess that makes sense. And not a ton of my mutuals are online. Again, I think it's early. That's all right. We don't need to raid someone every single time. But we can go ahead and go to outro. And we will call that a jam stream for today. I need to work on next week's schedule. It's going to be primarily gaming stuff next week. But I'm thinking, it'll also depend. I have to check and see if I'm doing D&D next week. But we will be looking at something new. And probably I'm thinking we work on Raido and maybe jump back into Monster Hunter. And then slot in something new, game I've been talking about for a bit. But I'll figure that out. The schedule will go up for the end of the day today, hopefully. But until then, thanks to everyone who came and hung out. We got some stuff done today and got to talk about beatboxing, so I think that's a successful jam stream. Well, in the meantime, I will catch you all in the next one. Have a good rest of your evening, morning, and I'll see you in the next stream.